Well, it's just gone 6 p.m. on the east coast of Australia and 7 a.m. in the beautiful industrial town of Glasgow. As the UN reports overnight that 21,695 government officials are registered and are attending this year's COP, 11,700 observers, and we're going to be hearing a few of those today, and a whopping 3,781 journalists. Day 3 dawns on the COP as the leaders have been sent packing and negotiators now take over. But serious questions are being asked about whether it is becoming too exclusive. Hello and welcome to G'day Glasgow, to the BCSD Australia program, being brought to you from Sydney via downtown Glasgow. The program is being broadcast from the land of the Camaragal people, and we acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And we're particularly welcoming of any First Nations people. Well, 48 hours in, and that is if you can get in. The challenge is that we've seen a number of deals already: forests, methane, and India's commitment. But if you think it's difficult to get in to the COP, and this is the line to get in, people, the line to get in. And this is the line to get out. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. So as the leaders leave, the negotiators are now in the spotlight as world leaders are handing over to their negotiating teams the difficult but perhaps not impossible task of getting a deal done. Commentators are saying it is turning into the most exclusive COP over the past decade. Observers are being barred for the ability for any access to any of the negotiating areas, despite so many assurances that were previously provided by the UN Secretariat and only in the last few days by the UN COP presidency. Some say that this, in fact, feels worse than the first few days of Copenhagen, which is interesting. Currently, as I said, there are 11,700 registered observers at COP, but to date, only 36 have actually been allowed into the negotiating area. The day is kicked off with the launch of a raft of new initiatives to tackle deforestation under the auspice of a brand new coalition of over 100 countries that have pledged to end net deforestation by 2030, and that is significant. The march of net zero targets has continued with Nigeria, and we'll come to that in a moment, and also Kenya reportedly aiming for net zero by 2050. The UK, the EU and the US signed off on a new $8.5 billion just energy transition partnership with South Africa to help curb the country's reliance on coal. Meanwhile, the US-EU methane pledge initiative exceeded all expectations, with Joe Biden confirming almost 100 nations have now set a target to cut methane emissions 30% by 2030. And we've heard in the last few hours already, the global methane pledge is being translated into action within the United States with the new EPA regulations. Just as importantly, the UK government delivered something of a coup after 40 countries, including economic superpowers, signed on to what's called the Glasgow Breakthroughs Initiative, which aims to slash the cost of clean technology globally. The Rockefeller Foundation, for example, alongside the IKEA Foundation and the Bezos Earth Fund, launched the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet with an initial $10 billion of funding from philanthropies and development banks to support energy access and the clean energy transition in the Global South, in strategic partnership with the UK-led Energy Transition Council. And very interestingly, from an Australian perspective, the First Movers Coalition, a US-led buyers club of 25 major global companies, including, yes, you guessed it, Australia's Andrew Forrest and Fortescue Future Industries, just look at the top left-hand picture, is making purchasing commitments to help commercialise clean and important emerging clean technologies across hard to decarbonise sectors like steel, trucking, shipping, aviation, aluminium, concrete, chemicals, and direct air capture. And in less than 3 hours ago, Tim Cook announced that Apple was also joining the coalition. There was a sobering reminder, though, of the scale of the climate challenge, with Nature publishing the results of a survey of climate scientists, which found a significant majority think that the 2 degrees Celsius temperature goal contained in the Paris Agreement will actually be missed. There was also a flurry of finance-related announcements this morning, yesterday morning, including the launch of a new partnership between multilateral banks, governments, and philanthropic organisations that want to mobilise $100 billion of clean energy finance in the developing and emerging economies by 2030. So in short, Prime Minister Johnson has declared at the end of day 2 that he's cautiously optimistic as part 1 of COP comes to a close that is being a success. And what about those pledges? Well, Brazil's new target is having some serious shade being thrown as to their new climate target, where analysts are already looking at whether or not, although the percentage increase from 43% of reduction to 2030 to 50%, the total emission target has actually not changed. In fact, by 1.2 gigatons by 2030. What they did actually change was the baseline. Canada did announce that it was committed to reducing methane emissions in the oil and gas sector by at least 75% by 2030. And as the first country to make this commitment, they're now calling on other energy producers, Australia take note, to join them in doing what's needed to tackle methane emissions right now. And as I indicated earlier, Nigeria pledged to reach net zero by 2060 and end deforestation by 2030. Now, as the largest economy in Africa, this country's commitment is very much a step in the right direction. But let's look at the other non-state actor that are going on right at this minute. Nigel Topping in the top right-hand corner, who's the UN's high-level climate action champion, with his aim to amp up the climate action ahead of and during COP26, was pleased to announce that the Race to Zero campaign, its ranks continue to swell. The UN-backed campaign, which calls on businesses, cities, and other organisations to set credible net zero targets, has provided the latest update on its growing ranks. And I have to say, the results are pretty remarkable. According to their statement, the campaign now includes 5,235 businesses, 67 regions, 441 financial institutions, 1,039 educational institutions, 52 healthcare institutions, 1,049 cities. Moving on to Article 6, some very interesting and promising progress as the first update of the technical negotiations indicate that we may just have a deal. Who knew? Meanwhile, back home in the land of Oz, apparently space in the Australian pavilion has been dedicated to Australian businesses. Hardly a surprise, but it includes not just Andrew Forrest's green hydrogen-focused Fortescue Future Industries and Sun Cable, which obviously is oriented towards renewable energies and plans to send solar energy captured in the Northern Territory to Singapore, as well as a startup company, Mineral Carbonation International. But alongside them is the oil and gas giant Santos. Guardian reports in Australia that the Australian government has now been criticised for prominently hosting a fossil fuel company, Santos, at its pavilion during the summit. And as you heard here last night on G'day Glasgow from Richie Merzian, the Australian Institute today in Australia released a report that investigates that as Australia promises net zero by 2050, it's in fact planning 100 plus new coal and gas projects by 2050 that would, from an emissions point of view, increase our emissions profile by 1.7 billion tonnes per year. So now you're up to date, and let's now bring in our guest speakers for this session today. And I think we're going to be welcoming Lyndon Edgell, Keryn James, John Carstensen, Dave Rouse, Amanda Sturgeon and Matthew Warnken. But what I'll do with Amanda and Lyndon, I think, is welcome you and put you into the participants list, unless you're more than happy to stay where you are. So Keryn, Matthew, and John, and Dave, can I get you to open up your video? And of course I need you, Lyndon, but not today. Dave, John, Keryn, and Matthew, can I get you to open up your screens? Let's see you all in your Glaswegian glory. Keryn, big welcome. Now, I understand we have a COP novice on our panel this evening, that being Keryn James. So Keryn, firstly to you, why are you there? Why haven't you come back to Australia and greeted us all with open arms, which you can do now, by the way? And what are you telling your clients, which are clearly global in nature and across so many sectors? What are the reasons why you're there, and what are you telling them about why COP is important?
Well, there's some big questions there, Andrew. Thank you very much. And the reason that I'm not in Australia is because I was actually back during July and August and ran the gauntlet of our quarantine system to visit family. But I think just to sort of touch on the sort of why we're here, Andrew, as you know, ERM is a global sustainability consultancy firm. And so this is what we do. This year is our 50th anniversary. And, you know, our purpose is to shape the world's leading organizations. And so this is everything that we're about. So it is incredibly important for us to be here to understand what's going on, what's the conversation, you know, what are the emerging themes, what are the emerging commitments, and so on, so that we can help our clients sort of navigate and understand what those emerging themes, topics, conversations are. And I think importantly, make connections with other clients, with other organizations. I mean, it is, you showed the picture earlier, Andrew, of the people queuing up to get in. I was in that queue yesterday.
Sorry.
And that was only half of the queue, Andrew.
Right.
There was the same queue again outside the first gate. So it sort of, at times it's taking up to 2 hours to sort of get through the queue to get into the blue zone. So it's incredibly, you know, busy. It's very chaotic. It's somewhat hard to sort of know what's going on. So you made mention of people having difficulty getting into the sessions. I think some of that is just simply because of the sheer scale of the event, and the sort of challenges of knowing how to get from A to B to C, etc. So it is, you know, there is just thousands and thousands of people here. And, you know, for me, it is just incredibly important that we seek to engage, to collaborate, you know, and frankly, to contribute to the debate. In terms of what we're telling our clients, I think it's sort of a combined message, Andrew. One is that, you know, there is, I think, significant concern from the scientific community and frankly from all communities, including the business community, about just how big the challenge is that we have in front of us and how little time we have left to address it. However, at the same time, I think there is a significant note of optimism from the business community and the finance community in particular. And I think that there is a real sense that, you know, with capital deployed in the right manner, with, you know, the right level of collaboration, and you've outlined so many different sort of pledges and commitments and so on that have already been made, then I think that there is a view that, you know, with business, with the finance sector, with government, with NGOs involved in collaborating together, actually, we can do this. I was at a dinner on Monday evening, and perhaps I'll close my comments with this, and Al Gore was speaking, and he made a comment which said, there's a revolution going on, a sustainability revolution, and it's at the same scale as the Industrial Revolution and at the same pace as the digital revolution. And that really resonated with me, because I think that there is some truth to that. And I think there is, in some ways, a deep recognition of the challenge, including, I think, and in particular, the need for an inclusive transition, which is, very challenging. But also, I think, a sense of optimism that if we can actually marshal human ingenuity, the significant amount of capital that is out there and able to be deployed, then actually we can make progress.
Well, encouraging words, actually. So, and from a COP novice, very exciting.
From a COP novice,
From a COP novice, very good. Let's jump to John, who's a local, and in the same vein, what are you looking at? What are the issues and the possible outcomes from this particular COP that you consider are of most interest to business?
I think the key for me, and there are probably three top items in this. That is that at this COP we will see the actions that are required to decarbonize, so that the 1.5 degree goal stays alive. This is not just about new pledges, new nice statements. This is actually about seeing that the action and the pathway to achieving those goals, that they are clearly laid out. The second part that I think is really important for us, that is that there is clear action on how we are going to manage the impacts of. Already know that that is being felt, and it will continue to be felt ever more. And we now know that there is a clear correlation between forest fires and increased storms and floods and everything. There is a clear correlation between climate change and those events happening. So that's the second big thing. It's that we deal with the impact of climate change. And the third thing, which I believe is absolutely fundamental for any agreement in Glasgow to be successful, is that that the world come true on the promise to pay $100 billion US dollars to developing countries. Without that, and we are short of this global pledge at the moment, and with no indication that it will be met until 2023, I believe it is. And without that, developing countries will not be able to respond either to the challenge of reducing carbon emissions or the challenge of coping with the impacts. So those three things: decarbonisation, actual pathways to decarbonisation, and dealing with the impact, and finally the funding. That's very high on my wish list.
Well, we'll add those to the BCSD Good COP barometer and see how they're tracking this time next week. A big welcome to Dave Rouse, who's actually not Joanne Yowich, but we'll take colleagues and friends from the south, albeit from the ditch on the other side of Australia. A big welcome to you. Dave, give us a sense of, are you a COP novice as well? And if you are, what's been your first blush, your first reaction of this circus trade fair, an incredibly important international negotiation?
Hey, thanks very much. Yes, I'm a COP novice, and my first impression is, I guess it's as disorganised as the governments that are trying to solve problems together. So that, from my perspective, concerns me. I have seen some hopeful contributions coming through at a nationwide level, not from God bless New Zealand, God bless Australia, but I'm a little underwhelmed with what we've presented on both sides. But that really drives us to, we always knew that this is not just a government problem, this is an everybody problem. And this is the good thing about COP26, is that it involves the wider communities, the business communities that are actually taking action, that are helping to involve their customers, their teams on these journeys. Our key objective is to raise the bar on carbon offsets in the voluntary market. Part of that is around regulation, which is lacking. It's very difficult for the market, for our business clients and for their individual clients to be able to know what is a good offset. And, the claims of carbon zero from one company can be very, very different in the actual outcomes from the claims of carbon zero from another. So we need that regulation, and we need to attribute into the carbon offsets rating system, which tells us, are they 5-star carbon credits, which have biodiversity in them, social impact, additionality and permanence, or are these credits likely to go up in smoke in another 5 or 10 years and we're buying them at a bargain to claim something that's relatively meaningless? So if we can start to address that, we can raise the bar on carbon offsets and actually use them as a tool to complement the reduction strategies going on and help create the future state of the planet that we all want. And this is well aligned to organisations like WWF, which I'm very closely aligned with, and the Panda Pavilion is where I'm spending a lot of my time. And then at a government level, what we can do to lobby them. Sometimes I feel like this falls on deaf ears, but we'll keep trying nonetheless. There are some simple adjustments that could be made in the Paris Agreement at a United Nations level, including taxation and treatment on carbon offsets in the voluntary space, so that, for example, they're treated like a charitable donation, because with bequeaths and donations at the moment, there's no tax rebate in most countries for carbon offsets. There's no GST added to it, but certainly they're not treated in the same space as charitable donations are. Of course, for companies, they can claim it back. So there are some simple instruments that we're hoping to keep driving messages forward at COP26, in between working on the biodiversity and rating systems. So that's the main goal. Networking with colleagues in the industry and seeing how we can all work together and align better. And the last bit is the nomenclature, or the naming of what are we calling things. So under a lot of countries' new emissions trading schemes or proposed emissions trading schemes, including New Zealand, Australia, the removal mechanism from the nationally determined contributions, or the country's inventory on carbon, if we remove those abilities to pull voluntary credits out of the national inventory, then effectively you've got a double counting situation. And under that situation, companies won't be able to claim that this is carbon neutral, because if a business has offset something, but the country is also saying, hey, these are all the trees growing in our country towards Paris, that's going to be a real challenge in the market. And we don't need to confuse the general public with having to come up with new terms that say this is carbon neutral except for the nationally determined contributions or something like that. We want to keep this simple. We've got momentum going from the public, which has been driven from millennials and Gen Zs upwards. And this is driving businesses to want to take action to address that, because these millennials are spending money with those businesses. And ultimately, we can't go confusing a market which is just emerging and just driving things in the right direction. So those are the kinds of debates that we're trying to contribute to. Whether we're heard or not will be yet to be determined.
Stay tuned. We're only, we're not even, I think we are actually a quarter of the way in. So Matthew, let's heartily welcome you to Glasgow. Last time we saw you, we had a mask over your face and you were actually in Kingsford Smith Airport.
Yes.
How's the journey been, and what have you been doing since we saw you last?
Journey's good, so made it. Quite surreal going from lockdown to international travel. The key thing about COP, I think, is really the step count. So yesterday, even though it was just a half day, up to 16,000, steps.
Whoa.
Which just gives you an indication of the amount of walking round and round and round and round. Not to mention to get your lateral flow test. I don't know if you can see that.
Whoa.
Every day is a new way to explore your nasal cavity. So I had my first lateral flow test, and that's going to be a daily ritual, which we're enjoying too. But signs of what can be done to host a large COVID-safe event. Look, Andrew, for me, I think Glasgow is emerging to almost like a tale of two COPs. And so you very much see the politics of targets and the need and the urgency for action, and that almost drives down a pathway which is quite sobering. After all, it is raining on Greenland's ice cap, and that underlines the urgency for action. But there is definitely the politicking there in terms of what it should be, and then picking up on what Keryn said, there is this real undercurrent though of hope, and I do like that phrase from Al Gore in terms of a sustainability revolution. And so after getting all my credentials done, I was at the Australia event last night, which was the Australian Technology Stakeholders Reception. And there was very much focused on solutions and what can be done, mobilizing that investment and getting things done. And even just the host of that event was Australia's first offshore wind project, Star of the South. It's a $12 billion kind of project being funded by Copenhagen offshore partners, 2.2 gigawatts of electricity off the coast of Gippsland. And we're seeing these kind of projects, which, if you hark back to the Nicholas Stern review, these are wedge in nature in terms of being able to deliver gigatons of abatement. And then that there is that undercurrent in terms of progress and momentum is building. And importantly, a focus on emissions removals as a key part of that story. So the race to net zero is really important, but we need to go beyond. And for a safe climate, that's about removal emissions, which is a technology and a land use and a nature-based solutions equation. Wow,
that was a lot. And we've run out of time, but I know that all of you are coming back in one form or another over the next few days. So we're going to park all of that interesting content and deliberation and move on as quickly as possible. Thank you, Catherine Byrne. I will read that in the chat function later, but I haven't got time to read it now, but do thank you. A big thank you to the speakers, or as we're calling you all, the COP stars, for your contribution today, and look forward to catching up with you over the next few days as well. Let me move very swiftly back to just a couple of things to let you know. As you are aware, you're all going into Finance Day, and such an important day because there's going to be big announcements, good, bad, and indifferent, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not this is the beginning of the end, or one hopes the end of the very beginning, and some robust and healthy conversation between developed and developing world around time commitments being truncated and wallets being opened even in post-pandemic times. I also wanted to highlight very quickly what's going to happen in terms of really important events, and one of them, Keryn in particular, is very much alive to. And that is 3 events that I want to, and actually I just want to make sure I can get the slides to do the right thing so I can see people properly. There we go. So for the edification of those who have decided to stay up over the next few hours in Australia, the events that we're going to be tracking include the 2 events that the Australian government will be hosting, one by the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the second by the Climate Change Authority. And all of these times are, by the way, in GMT. And in the case of climate disclosure standards boards, you will be hearing some very interesting news from our dear friend, Marty McBride, who will be joining us again tomorrow night to let us all know what has happened since while you were sleeping. And then, of course, the WBCSD kicks off a number of events, 2 of which I thought I would shout out very quickly. being the investor's role in the race to zero. But most importantly, and I think most of you will be asleep when this is on, the manifesto launch for climate action. And it's one of those particular moments in time in the WBCSD life cycle that is extremely important. And the members of the BCSD Australia will be talking about the implications of this launch at its weekly meeting next Monday. So stay tuned for some really significant insights into the work program of the WBCSD going forward. And Keryn, I look forward to trying to catch up with you at least before the end of COP, given that you are a vice chair of the WBCSD. It would be great to get your insights. Gosh, what a good one, Andrew. Look, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Wish you all a safe journey onwards to the next few hours. Tomorrow, we're going to be joined by Alan Hendry at Mott McDonald. Marty McBrien will be back with us. And fingers crossed, Joanne Yoich will actually be here to dial in and tell us the exciting news that's been going on in South Africa over the last few days. But for now, as always, respect the science, respect nature, and respect each other. My name is Andrew Petersen. Thank you all for joining us and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Bye for now.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everybody.